Amen. Good to be here. Amen. Anybody feel the spirit of anticipation? I just know that God is up to something. God is doing something that only God can do. Amen. Come on, say amen. Thank you, Jesus. So my heart rejoices. Heart rejoices. Great expectation. Amen. What the future holds. We started a series on last Sunday on learning God's language. And so I want to continue on that series today. Learning God's language. Learning God's language. Speaking the language of God. And one of the key points the last week for our subtitle was that God is not bilingual. He speaks the language that you speak. We just got to get a gist of what he's saying and what he means by what he says. Amen. Touch somebody and say, God is not bilingual. He don't speak multiple languages. He speaks one language and it's your language. Amen. Just got to interpret what he's saying with clarity. And so let me do a quick review, and I got one other section to add to it today that's going to open up a little bit more, and it goes somewhere with this series, this word. So again, the theme for this month on these series is learning the language of God. Last Sunday's subtitle, God is not bilingual. Pull up a few scriptures and read. I'll do a review of that, and we'll move to the section for today. Thank God for all of the worship, praise, and going forth, prepared the way for the word. Exodus chapter 3 is where we pull from, and Moses led the flock to the back of the desert, came to Horeb, the mountain of God, also known as Sinai. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of fire from the midst of the bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire. The bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that, he turned aside to look. So when the Lord saw that, he turned aside to look. So when the Lord saw that, he turned aside to look. God called to him, spoke to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not draw near to this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, you know all of the rest, Isaac, Jacob, so forth and so on. Here are the quick reviews and points, and I'm going to move. I went into a little bit more extensive detail last Sunday, and I want today just going to read through it to refresh your memory for those who weren't here to introduce you to what we covered. God used, what is it now? Something unnatural, something supernatural, something unique. In this case, it was the burning bush. To communicate with Moses. Of course, there are many ways that God could have communicated, but he chose this unexpected source, this unnatural occurrence to communicate with Moses. And we understand from that, in particular, because this unexpected source, this unprescribed method of God using something like a burning bush is how God will best get our what? Undivided attention. It is something that God has to go through so much extreme to get our attention. But I thank God that he's willing to go through such extreme to get our undivided attention. Did it again, undivided attention. Undivided attention. So we read in there that Moses, when he saw that this bush wasn't being consumed, he said, Let me turn and draw closer to see this great sight. Something is unusual about this. But it was God's way of getting his undivided attention. So from that, understand when you see a supernatural, unnatural, unprescribed method of something occurring, it's something that fills us with awe and amazement, but understand that there's in all likelihood, God is using that to get our attention. He's trying to get our attention. In this case, and he got it. Here's what we understand. If God doesn't get your undivided attention, then you are not accessible, reachable, approachable, available, and the list goes on. And I'm going to come back and tap into all of this today. This is why it's so important that God gets our attention and get our undivided attention, because otherwise we're not approachable, we're not reachable, we're not available. So the burning bush, put it in another way, this unexpected, unnatural occurrence is just how God was able to reach Moses and to access his heart, to connect with it, because he had his attention. Thank you, Jesus. Come on. Come on, tell God, you got my attention. You got my attention. Come on, come on, say it again. You got my attention. You got my attention. Thank you. Now you can talk to somebody that say, God got my attention. God got my attention. Tell him he got your attention. Right. We're going to get that. We're going to get this attention thing here. Give God, and God wants undivided attention. So God used this phenomenon here to really capture Moses' undivided attention, because without that, Moses was not mentally, spiritually available to what God was saying. God is always talking. So every time you see this, something unnatural, unexpected occurrence, understand that simply God is trying to do what? Because when Moses gave God his attention, the Bible says, we just read it, that God spoke to him when he had his attention. All right. The next part on that is we understand that Moses was traveling, going on the backside, going on to Horeb. And now I call that the power of isolation. That not only did God get his attention, but God isolated him. Isolation is separation of time alone. Here's the point I want to make, and I'm going to just read it back. And Moses led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst. It is again. And Moses led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame. So Moses is traveling along here. This isolation is necessary because it prevents outside interference. Come on, this is repeat, this is review. Say that again. It prevents interference. That's why isolation is necessary. It prevents interference. There's too much interference. I said this last week, and I'll just repeat it, keep moving, that if you go back and think about the time that you missed God, it's because somebody intruded. And this intrusion often brings misdirection, an unwanted opinion that misdirects you. So for God to get a clear message for you, he has to separate you, pull you aside so that he can speak directly to you without interference. There you go. So oftentimes when something's going on between you and God, it is necessary to get people out of your ear. That's a nice way of saying it. You probably think get out of your face. I know it's necessary to get people out of your ear because it becomes a distraction and a distortion of what God is saying. God is trying to speak and communicate, but there's often too much interference. To go a step further with that, people often, this is all review again, people often violate you without you knowing it. What I mean by violate, they intrude the areas that they shouldn't. They trespass when you're really saying, leave that alone. Don't go there. But people in their boldness trespass in forbidden territory. Let's see how. I always think about an example. All of us, say all of us.
All of us.
Got a pass.
Amen. 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 Amen.
That's right. And so, like anything else, we sell one house and move to another house, we move on. But you got people who's their only, and this is not for nobody here, just an example, their only motivation is to go and dig up dirt. So what they're doing is they're violating. They're trespassing against you. They're interfering where they were not invited. And you got to live with that a lot of times. And so, if you're not careful, you'll get sidetracked and you'll miss God. So, but this goes on all the time. People constantly are trespassing. That is, going into areas of your life that they weren't invited. Bringing up stuff that they shouldn't. Just, and I don't mean this invited on you. I'm just talking in general nature. That's the nature of people. So that's trespassing. That's violating you. Thank you, Jesus. So this goes on all the time without you really knowing it. People interfere. My Lord. So, and it's going to take us to the next point as well. So that's going to happen. But until we can hear God alone, we will never hear him clearly. So the isolation is necessary for you to learn the voice of God. And if you're not careful, the violation of people trespassing will get you off track and distort your conversation with God. Break it up. So, but you stay in isolation. Let God speak. Let God deal with you. Let God learn God's voice, because until you learn to hear him alone, you won't really hear him clearly. You won't. You know, God speaks to us mostly when we're alone. You know, lying down at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Why? Because the phone is not ringing. Hopefully the TV is not on. You're in an isolated place where you're open to God, and now the devil may be knocking on the door all the time, but you're open to God, and he's able to speak to you in that alone place, in that separate place. And that's often where you can hear the voice of God clearly. And that's where you really learn to God. That's where God speaks to you and show you things and so forth and so on, in those isolated places. So it's necessary. Don't, you know, I know a lot about a person when they can't stand to be by themselves. That tells me a lot about them. That doesn't bother me, because I understand, I value that alone time. It's my time with God, when God is going to best communicate with me. Say thank you.
Thank you, Lord.
So an example of that is 1 Kings 19, and after the earthquake, a fire, and the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, it is a still small voice. Here's where Elijah the prophet got in a quiet place. He saw all of the commotion, great earthquake, great thunderstorm, and all. He kept running to see where was God. He didn't hear God, but when he went back into the cave in a small place and sat almost in a place of discouragement, in a place of quietness where his spirit was quiet, then all of a sudden he heard the voice of God speaking to him in a still small voice. That's when you learn the voice of God more clearer. You learn his voice more clearer. Until you can get that place and identify him, you'll have trouble knowing when God is speaking. Too much we hear God through other sources and not directly. Amen. So here Elijah heard it, and then he wrapped his face in a manner and went out and, of course, stood in the entrance of the cave.